It's time to step up your game.
Let's get ready to rumble!
You're listening to Game On.
Talkin Toons!
Your inside track to gaming and fitness.
Of course!
Mamma mia! We've got interviews one-on-one with your gaming experts.
Hi, folks. This is Jim Cummings.
This is Courtney Taylor.
This is Duke Nukem.
And we'll help you keep fit along the way.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for.
Get ready, because Game On starts now.
Game on! Game on! Game on!
We have an exciting guest joining us on Game On today. He's the man behind such characters as Pinky of Pinky and the Brain, Yakko Warner of Animaniacs, Raphael of the classic Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Donatello of the current Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. He's been featured in movies, cartoons, and video games in hundreds of roles. Joining me on Game On today is voice actor Rob Paulsen. Rob, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me, buddy. I'm most excited to speak to you, but also to welcome the National Hockey League back to our television screen.
Oh, I can understand. It was a thrill just to see some of the games that happened. Not a thrill to see Vancouver losing, but I can live with that.
No, well, hey, listen, man, I'm from Detroit, so I'm a big Red Wing fan, and we got our butts handed to us 6-0 by St. Louis. You know, but even when they lose, it's just great to have the game back, and hopefully these guys can have their issues worked out for the next few years, and we won't have to go through that again. But back to the business at hand. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. Rob, it's unreal just how many roles you've been connected to over the years. But let's go back to what started it all. What made you decide that voice acting was the career for you?
Well, honestly, the truth is, I really did want to be a hockey player when I was a kid, and I fortunately realized by the time I was about 17 that I had neither the talent nor the temperament to make any money as a hockey player. And the other desperate passion that I had in my life was performing. Mind you, I grew up many years ago, you know, before there was DVDs or VHS or tape or, you know, the cartoons were primarily on Saturday morning. I, like most kids, loved cartoons, but I didn't necessarily think of myself as a future voice actor, although I absolutely had a desire to become a performer. I didn't realize when I was 15 or 16 and started to really get into it that it would end up being my vocation versus my avocation, but fortunately that's the way it worked out, and the voiceover thing really took hold probably in about the mid-'80s when I started getting voiceover work. I'd come out to Los Angeles in the late 70s ostensibly as an on-camera talent, having had a pretty significant theater and music background, and was working on different characters and dialects, but sort of for my own enjoyment, not necessarily with an eye on voice work. But I was doing, you know, live-action stuff, TV shows, commercials, that sort of thing, and had an opportunity to read for some cartoons and started booking them. And after a while, it was clear that it's pretty cool when you do voice work that you're not limited by the way you look. And that was very liberating for me as an actor. So I just sort of jumped in with both feet. And the first shows I got hired on were the original Transformers and G.I. Joe back in the, I guess, mid-'80s. And Johnny Quest, a new version of which was being done in Hanna-Barbera at the time. And then I, you know, got Ninja Turtles at, I think, 1987. Is when we began recording first. And so after that, man, it was like, this is what I do. And I sort of left the on-camera world behind. And in my case, I think it was a good choice. I'm having a great time.
Now, if we were to talk about all of your roles, we'd be here all day. But one aspect of your career I'd love to focus on, and I'm glad you mentioned it, was Raphael of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And you've returned to TMNT, but as a different turtle altogether, as Donatello. What's it like to be part of multiple generations of this series?
It is the biggest kick in the pants you can imagine. It's such a thrill and a huge honor to get two cracks at, no pun intended, such an evergreen franchise. I mean, it really is a big deal, Jeff. Certainly, I had no idea, nor did any of the other folks working on Turtles at the time, back in, you know, the late 70s, have any idea that the show would become the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you know, this iconic international sensation. that has now lasted a quarter of a century, and in all of its various iterations. When it took off and really, gained an incredible footing, we were all very excited because, of course, it meant steady work and all the stuff that comes with that. You make a couple of dollars, folks get a kick out of it, you get to a lot of cool charity events. It was really just really wonderful. Well, many years ago, it's literally 25 years later, last year, when the show began, the new one began airing, I would have to argue it's as big as it ever was. The difference is now everybody knows what it is, so it's already got a foothold. In terms of my participation, I just can't believe that I'm lucky enough to get 2 cracks at this. I mean, there aren't too many people who get 2 shots at arguably one of the top, 3 or 4, maybe 5 franchises in the history of kids TV. I mean, it's a big deal. SpongeBob, Turtles, you go back and there are always lots of well-known cartoons over the last 60, 70 years, but, it'd be like working on getting a job on MASH at the beginning of the career, at the beginning of my career, and spending 3 or 4 years as Hawkeye, and then coming back at the end of the show 15, 20 years later as Trapper John. It's crazy. So I am incredibly fortunate. Again, I think it's due in no small part to the fact that I'm not limited by my face. I mean, I'm firmly ensconced in middle age. I'm sure I'm much older than you, and it's a really cool thing that I get to do this and this cool kick-ass turtle character again, and nobody cares what age I am. It's really fun.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that about the fact that you're not limited by looks, by how you are. And I think one show where it really shows that is your time with Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain, because you were the voice behind so many amazing characters from these shows.
Yeah, I have been very, very fortunate. I often tell people that, with all due respect to Lou Gehrig, that I think I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth, because I've had the opportunity to work on some really good stuff. And if you're fortunate, you get 1 or 2 really great things during your career. A very, very close friend of mine is Brad Garrett, who was on Everybody Loves Raymond for, I think, 8 or 9 seasons. And Matthew Perry I know really well, and of course that was a great gig. And they're all doing well, and they all get to do other stuff, but pretty much, they're known for their tenure on really well-known, huge hit TV shows. Now, in my world, it's not it's not as probably as big a deal to most people when you're talking about cartoons, but I do know that cartoons have an enormous, profound effect on a lot of people. And in my career, I could make the argument that I've had probably 4 or 5 really well-known shows that I've had the good fortune of being part of. Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, Turtles twice. I was Carl Weezer on Jimmy Neutron, and I was Arthur on The Tick, and I've gotten to work on some really incredibly great stuff. So I feel like I've had more than my share. And if I were to die tomorrow, I think I've had a hell of a run. And I have to say, I really, really do want to make it clear to the folks listening that I get that the reason I'm working is not just because I happen to be good at my gig and people are nice enough to give me the work, but I wouldn't be working if I didn't have people paying attention. And that goes for all of us. We all understand that people like your listening audience are the folks that butter our bread. And so I'm incredibly grateful that people continue to embrace these characters. And as I get older, the best part about it is now I've been around long enough that I have a fan base literally from 8 or 9 years old to 40. It's really cool. I'm incredibly grateful.
Now, what's amazing about your career is just some of the times where you've had roles where someone else has had that role before you. How exactly do you go about emulating these different personalities, these different temperaments, where you have an actor who's as insane as Jim Carrey and trying to emulate him in The Mask?
Well, like most of us, I'm a big fan of Jim's, and it so happens that I kind of have that sensibility, that is to say, I'm a little bit nutty, and I'm unencumbered by my adultness, which is very good for my job, because when I go into work, I act like an 8-year-old. So having that facility lent itself pretty well, I think, to me auditioning for the role. And then when I got it, the difficult part, I think, was more for the producers of the show, because they were very keenly aware that Jim Carrey was the reason that the movie was successful. So I think what they were concerned about was, could I pull off enough of what Jim did in the movie to make a TV series of 40 or 50 episodes, whatever it ended up being, interesting. And so that took a while to kind of get my brain around that. it wasn't a big stretch for me to bounce all over the place because that's what I do anyway. And I've done that on other characters. I'm not so much an impressionist. You know, there are so many good ones out here. Maurice LaMarche, Billy West, Jeff Bennett, and Frank Welker. They're all just incredible impressionists, and that's not my strong suit. But I'm a good improviser. I'm pretty good with dialects, and all of those things put me in pretty good stead in terms of doing that cartoon. Interestingly, I have had the opportunity to revoice Jim in a couple of movies, Liar Liar, and it was a Truman Show. There were a couple of them in which he was not available to loop himself or revoice himself in a feature, and they would call me up to do them. But, you know, Jim's timbre and his voice, that isn't that much different than mine. He's got, when he was playing Stanley Ipkiss, it was just his basic Jim Carrey character voice, and when he put on the mask, that's when all the wackiness ensued. So that's kind of the way it worked for me. And I don't think that people ever thought it was Jim, but it didn't matter. They were more, you know, what was important was that they bought the show and bought the fact that they liked that character.
You're also a podcaster yourself with the Talkin Toons podcast. What made you want to start your own show?
Well, I went through kind of a slow period, almost 3 years ago, the beginning of 2010. I was just kind of thinking, wow, this is really unusual because I'm used to working, which is great, and I'm very lucky to be able to do that. But it was particularly slow, Jeff, and I thought, well, I certainly don't want to sit here and feel sorry for myself because that's showbiz, man. That's the way it goes. But I had been a guest on several podcasts, and then I thought, well, there isn't one specifically about folks who do what I do, at least not that I know of. I know there were a few that dealt with folks who were teaching voice acting and all that, and I'm not really a teacher. I'm doing some seminars now and private coaching, but it's pretty selective, except for the ones I just started this last weekend, and I'm going to continue are for beginners and everybody, and they're live online. You can go take my voice acting seminars at Ustream, that's the letter U, STREAM.TV/Rob Paulsen, PAULSEN, live. So that's Ustream.TV/Rob Paulsen live. But that wasn't what I began doing the podcast for. The podcast was essentially to come up with something else for me to do and see where it went. Because one day I was thinking, well, on my phone, I've got pretty much everybody's phone number who is anybody who is interested in cartoon voices would want to hear from. Nancy Cartwright, Mark Hamill, Jim Cummings, who was Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, and Tara Strong, and Ray DeLisle, and Frank Welker, and Peter Cullen, the Transformers guy, you know, everybody. So Maurice LaMarche, who's the Brain, and Jess Arnett, who's Wacko, and Tress McNeil, who's the Dot, and so all of these people I've known, getting on 30 years. So I just started doing it, and I would call up my friends and say, hey, I'm doing this thing, and I'll come over to your house and plug in my microphone, and we'll just talk. Well, here we are about almost 2 years later, and I've done 75 episodes, but people really embraced it, Jeff, and it turns out that I had no idea how many people are interested to hear from the voices behind their favorite characters. And what's happening more and more now is I do a lot of live appearances around the United States and Canada, and it's very gratifying to meet people to whom my characters and others, but I'm there, you know, doing my thing, and people are just so incredibly wonderful when they talk about Raphael and Pinky and Yakko and the Mask and the Tick and, you know, Jimmy Neutron and Goof Troop and all these shows I worked on, and they just had really wonderful effects on them. So the whole podcast thing, the whole Talkin Toons podcast was just kind of a serendipitous thing or kismet that I started doing it, and people bought it, and it's free, and they love it, and we're still going strong.
So with all of the roles that you've done over the years, with all of the other voice actors that you've had the chance to work with, that you've got to focus on the show, what would you say is the most important thing for new voice actors just starting their career to remember?
I think that the most important thing to remember, well, there are several, but I would think my best part of advice in terms of being a performer, whether it's voice acting or otherwise, is to perform. That is, do live improv, live theater, live music. Virtually everybody with whom I've worked, Jeff, in almost 30 years, and I've done a couple thousand half hours now, and I know many, many, many actors. Virtually all of them, people whom we've spoken about, with a few exceptions. The only two exceptions I can think of are, and I'll explain what I'm talking about in a second, are Corey Burton and Nancy Cartwright, who is, of course, Bart Simpson. Those are the only two personal, really close friends of mine with whom I work who are highly successful, who started out just wanting to be a voice actor. Everybody else, and I mean everybody, including myself, Tress McNeil, Maurice LaMarche, Frank Welker, on and on and on and on and on, all started out doing live theater, stand-up comedy, music, improv. So my best advice for a young actor, voice or otherwise, is to get as much experience live as you can. You can still work on all sorts of cool voices and emulate your favorite characters and all of that, but understand that by and large, you can emulate all these folks, but if you get out to L.A., the chances are there are going to be people still alive already doing the show. While it's fun to do your best impression of SpongeBob, Tom Kenny does it, and he's alive and well, and presumably will keep doing it until they stop, which who knows how long that'll be. So you can take all these things and steal things from this actor and that actor, which of course we all do, but then turn them into your own characters and stretch your own self. But the biggest important thing when you're young is to get as much experience performing as you can. If you're a singer, sing. If you're a dancer, dance. Improv, live stage, stand-up, music, whatever it is, do it all. You never know which part of that will end up putting you in a place that you get a really important job. If I hadn't had such a musical background when I was very young, that by the time the voice stuff started coming my way, I wouldn't have been so prepared and confident to do a role like Yakko Warner with a lot of singing, a lot of music. And there's no way I would have gotten that job had I not been able to sing. So at the time that I was, really involved in music as a kid, it was for my own enjoyment. And that's the best reason to get involved. It's not about the money. The money comes out as a result of doing good work and being passionate about your work. And that goes for whatever it is you do for a living. I don't care if you are a plumber or an actor or a doctor. You should do something because you're passionate about it and you can't not do it. All of the other stuff will take care of itself. But the passion that you follow in your life is what will make you successful.
Rob, absolutely fantastic to get a chance to speak with you today. Where can people find out more about you and your podcast if they'd like to know more?
Thank you so much. They can go to, I have an app for Apple products. Go to the App Store and just punch in Talkin Toons, Talkin, Talkin Toons, and that's Toons. You can get the free Talkin Toons app, which has all of my podcasts on it, and it tells you where I'll be performing live, where I'll be doing live seminars, when you can hear live performances on my podcast, and the pay-per-views we're doing now. You can also find my podcasts if you just go to iTunes under podcasts and search for, again, Talkin Toons, Talkintoons, or I think just my name, Rob Paulsen, Paulsen. My website is robpaulsenlive.com. My Ustream page, which is really becoming a big deal for me, is, as I said before, Ustream, that's the letter USTREAM.TV/Rob Paulsen Live. And there you'll see information about my live seminars. Folks can sign up and learn everything about the nuts and bolts of voice acting without having to come all the way to California. And because of the people I've had on my podcast, ultimately we'll get the best in casting people and the best in directors and the best in writers and producers, musicians who will come on and give you all their information as well. So I think it's very valuable. It gives you good value instead of having to come to LA and all of that. It's obviously geared toward voice acting. There's a lot of really good information there. But also at Ustream, we do live shows. I do several podcasts every now and then from the John Lovitz Comedy Club out here in LA, and that is also available at Ustream TV as a pay-per-view. So go to ustream.tv/Rob Paulsen. You'll be able to see what's coming up that you can participate in live or watch or send in questions which I can answer live in real time. It's pretty fun. There's a lot of cool stuff going on, and I'm really excited, and I'm very grateful that you took time out of your day to let me talk to you today, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Not a problem, Rob. A pleasure to have you on Game On today.
Thank you, buddy. You too. Go Wings.
That was voice actor Rob Paulsen. I'm Jeff Johnson. You're listening to Game On.
A little bit of the old, a little bit of the new,
I am assuming direct control.
and everything in between. You're listening to Game On GameNTrain.com.